Thanks, Theo. I'm excited to talk with you all today. My name's Diana, and like Theo said, I'm a product design lead at Cedar, which is a healthcare startup based out of New York City. So we build products at the intersection of healthcare and finance, which means we kind of have this double whammy of a design challenge where, after they've gone through a health issue, then we need to go in and ask them for money to pay their bills. So one of the things we like to say at Cedar is that everybody is a patient and everyone has their own billing story. And unfortunately, it's usually not a very good one. So I actually wanted to start today with my billing story, which is a few years ago. I was riding my bicycle, riding it through a green light, and a car took a left turn, didn't see me, and ran right into me. So fell off my bike, hit my knee, fractured my fibula. Luckily, I was okay otherwise. But I think the crazy thing about this experience was that the worst part, it wasn't riding the ambulance, going to the ER. It wasn't the physical therapy. It was actually dealing with the medical bills afterwards because they were so hard to understand. There were so many of them. It was hard to figure out where to pay them. And it took me months to sort through them all. So my story, it had a happy ending where I didn't need knee surgery. I got a big check from the driver's car insurance to help pay these bills, and even my bike ended up making it okay. But we know that not everyone's this lucky. So one of the great things is for my job now, working at Cedar, is that I get to tackle this challenge head on and try and see how we can really make the billing experience better for people so that no one else has to go through the same kind of pain that I went through. And if you're kind of curious about the scale of this problem, I'm definitely not alone. We found that 1 in 3 Americans don't think that healthcare providers have done enough to improve the billing experience. And this is kind of backed up when we looked at our own product metrics. Millennials, especially out of any other age group, they're more likely to feel this way, and they're the least likely to pay their healthcare bills. It's especially interesting when you think about this age group because we also know that they're the most likely to adopt digital health tools. So we really wanted to understand more at a more detailed level, just like how do they think about healthcare bills? How do they handle them? And so to do this, we did a research project in collaboration with IDEO to learn more about why this age group wasn't paying, to dig deeper into their behavior and their mindset. So we used a bunch of different research methods, and there's a couple that I want to dive into a little bit more with you today. So the first one is we did an exercise where we asked patients to who do you trust the most in your financial dealings? So we showed them these 3 circles and we said, all right, put who you trust the most at the center of the circle, and then kind of the further out you go, the less likely you are to trust them. And so who do you think ended up at the center of the circle? If people have any guesses, want to put anything in chat. But just let you know, so mom ended up winning. Turns out that, millennial patients, they really trust their mom. They're happy to give her money anytime. So that's not so surprising. And then, so who do you think was next in the trust? Was it dad? Was it their friends maybe? It turns out that their landlord was actually not too far out, because a lot of these patients, they're used to having their rent be a pretty predictable expense. They have it maybe on auto pay even. They have a personal relationship with their landlord. So they're like, yeah, I'm pretty happy to give money to my landlord. And then, of course, the big question is, where do you think healthcare was in this list? So unfortunately, it wasn't even on the map. Several of the patients that we talked to, they didn't even put healthcare inside of the circle options that we gave them, just kind of drew them outside. So we know there's a big problem of trust in healthcare, and it's a problem that we need to tackle before we can tackle the problem of helping patients pay their bills. The other type of research I want to talk about what we did is analogous research, where we looked to industries outside of healthcare and design to get inspiration. So I don't know if any of you know what this is, if you've seen one, if you've walked around LA, or there's one in New York City, I know, on the Upper East Side. So it's a cupcake ATM, which, the people at Sprinkles were inspired by the banking industry to create this ATM that allows you to get cupcakes any time of the day, any day. I think it's pretty awesome. I think it's a great example of how, some of the most transformative ideas can come from other industries. So for our version of analogous research, we decided to interview experts in other industries, and specifically the FBI. So I want to introduce the experts that we talked to. Meet Chip and Adele. So Chip it's actually two experts. They work as partners. They both live in DC, and they use his FBI savvy and her kind of like communication expertise to work with their clients to help them deal with difficult moments. So, Chip has 20 years of experience in the FBI dealing with hostage negotiation, drug busts. He was talking to suspects during the 9/11 case. And Adele, she works specifically with household brands to deal with kind of PR crises that they deal with and figure out the best way to communicate them. So excited to share with you what we learned from them today. But before I do that, I just wanted to make it 100% clear that at Cedar, we definitely do not think of our users and our patients as hostages. In fact, we were a little nervous before we were talking to them, how useful it would be. But we know that hostage negotiators, they need to build an incredible amount of trust. And as you heard from before, we've got a trust problem in healthcare. So, maybe we can't get people to mom level, but I think we can at least try and get them to landlord level. And here are 5 lessons we learned from Chip and Adele on how we can do that. So first lesson, it's all about empathy. Product designers, something that we like to say about ourselves is empathy is our superpower. And it turns out that FBI hostage negotiators like to say that too. And if you ever have boss or a coworker who thinks empathy is kind of a soft skill and we're not sure what it can do for your business, Chip says to tell them, I've used active listening and empathy when someone's got a gun to another person's head and have them put that gun down and walk out with their hands up. Can they do that? So even with this, it might surprise you a little bit that the FBI is promoting empathy so much. And, if you're talking to Chip, he'll be quick to tell you it's not because they're trying to be all warm and fuzzy. That's not who the FBI is. The reason why they want to promote empathy is that it just works, and it works really fast. So when you're thinking about Chip's job, he's calling complete strangers on the phone. He's trying to negotiate with them to do something that might be against their self-interest. So he's really only got seconds to establish a connection with them, or he's going to get hung up on. He found that this is a tool that's just really effective and really efficient. And finally, the last thing is it's not just designers and the FBI who value empathy. It's actually the patients themselves. So recently we did another study where we wanted to learn more about the pandemic. And we asked patients if you had one piece of advice to give healthcare providers on healthcare bills during COVID, what would it be? The things that patients emphasized were empathy, kindness, and simply being human during these trying times. This is advice that we really wanted to take to heart and show an example of how we put it into practice in our designs at Cedar. So when patients first enter our product to pay their bills, we make sure that the first thing that they see is a friendly greeting and their first name. And the reason for this is, we really want to make sure that everyone feels respected and seen as individual people, not seen as numbers in a spreadsheet. And so we're working hard to make that connection up front and start establishing groundwork for some trust. All right, so the next tip I want to share is about naming emotions. So this is another tip from Chip, and it's part of his official FBI training to never let an emotion go by without labeling it. If you can name someone's current emotional state, it really helps that person feel seen and creates that emotional connection. And so I think this is backed up by a lot of other studies and modern therapy practices where, putting feelings into words can act as kind of a brake on your emotions, even decreasing activity in the amygdala, your brain's alarm center, and just calming people down. So we know with our product that one of the biggest pain points for patients, and when they're probably feeling some of the strongest emotions, is when they get a big bill that they just can't afford to pay. So when we're presenting them some alternative options around paying their bills, like maybe getting financial assistance, we make sure that we call out their feelings directly about how we think they might be experiencing this moment, where these are things that we've heard firsthand from conversations with patients, that they're just really overwhelmed and they're not sure what to do with this big bill. All right, the next tip is about the lizard brain, which is this idea that in moments of fear and stress, people kind of revert to the more primitive parts of their brain that are focused on survival. It's really great when you want to stay alive, but it's not that great for having a calm, rational discussion on your finances and the best payment options for your bill. So the way I like to think about this tip in terms of design specifically is it's all about timing. When is the best point in a patient's journey to try and engage them and communicate them and get them to act? So we mapped out the patient journey end to end, and from all the way from before a patient even shows up for their healthcare visit to the point of the visit, they're waiting for insurance to get applied, and finally their bill is ready. And so a lot of our touch points with Cedar at the beginning are towards the end of this journey. After the bill is ready, we make it easier for patients to pay. But at this point, the patient might already be pretty stressed out after dealing with all of the healthcare and then getting this big bill that they may or may not be able to afford. And so one of the things that we're really interested in is trying to just move some of these same features earlier in their journey to be a little bit more proactive. Talk to the patients before some of these things are a problem, help them be more proactive, and get this information when they're in a calm state of mind. So one specific example of this is financial estimates, where before a patient shows up for their visit, we can start giving them an idea of how much it'll cost. And in our usability research, when sharing different screens, this is a screen that patients have been pretty excited to see. When we ask them what they would do with this information specifically, they overwhelmingly answer that they would start planning ahead. They would start budgeting their money and setting it aside so that they would be able to make payment down the line. And so I think this is one great example of how getting the timing right and is not just a better experience for our patients, but we believe it'll also lead to better results for the healthcare providers that we work with as well. All right, and then our fourth tip is around finding the unsaid narrative, which according to Adele, is kind of like a track that everyone has running in their head about themselves. And so we really want to dig deep whenever we think about our users and ask ourselves, who do they envision themselves to be? Who do they aspire to be? So I have a story about this from Chip, where he needed information from a former member of a drug cartel who had been placed in max security prison for committing 8 murders. And so, Chip starts off the negotiation by asking himself, he's like, what does this guy need? So they're offering all these things. It's like, do you want a better cell? It's really dark. Do you want to sell with a window? Do you want better food? Maybe you want to be moved to a center that's closer to your family. And the guy wouldn't even make eye contact with them. He just kept grunting no. So eventually Chip realized that it wasn't about trying to offer this man, better things in exchange for the information. It's actually just about showing respect for him. So he switched his tactics and he said, look, when you were at a certain point in your career, you were really successful. Your gang was at the top of the game, had the most ties like internationally. And so I really want your help as an expert in the field, as a businessman. Like, can you do that? And after he did that, then the man looked up, looked him in the eye, and said, all right, what do you need to know? And so I think this just kind of goes to prove that it's really important to find that how someone really thinks about themselves, the specific language that they use to describe themselves, and be able to say that back to them. And so a slightly less serious version of this in Cedar is we ran an experiment to kind of see how we could convince patients to unsubscribe from their paper statements and go purely digital with their bill notifications. So we ran two different sets of messaging. The first one said, save trees, go paperless. We had a little picture of a leaf by it. And the second one said, go digital, and had a picture of a laptop by it. And so the results of this experiment were pretty clear. Out of patients who made a payment, 45.5% of them unsubscribed with the Save Trees message, and 27.4% unsubscribed with Go Digital. And so, this kind of suggests that maybe our patients who unsubscribe, they like to think of themselves maybe more as environmentalists. Maybe they just really love trees. But either way, clearly the messaging here made a big difference in how they like to see themselves. Can you hear me? I think I got a message in the chat that we're losing sound. People wouldn't mind putting a yes, a Y, or an N in the chat really quick, just to make sure.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. All right, so the last tip I wanted to share is that people make mistakes. And then so the really important thing is that we need to help them acknowledge the mistakes so that everyone can move on and start tackling the problems. As Adele says, everybody lies, and the only way out is to really tell the ugly truth. And so she shared a story where she was working with a CEO who had been caught in a lie with his team, and the team was interrogating him, and it was kind of the mood was turning really sour in the room. So she took him aside one-to-one and said, like, look, what's the truth? Like, you just need to come clean to your team. I'll work with you. We can do it together. And we can do it in a way that doesn't make you look like a bad guy, but you just need to come clean to your team. And then, we can make it everyone's problem to solve together instead of them just pointing fingers at you. And so they did it. And then she was able to help the CEO and his team kind of move on from this really challenging situation. And so at Cedar, one of the points where we know that patients are dealing with a big challenge is, again, when they aren't able to pay their bill, maybe they can't pay it right away, or they can't afford it. And so here's an example of an email that we designed to send to them after they haven't been making payments for a while, even though we've been sending other messages. So rather than kind of escalating the situation, trying to get accusatory and be like, where's the money? Why aren't you paying? We wanted to acknowledge that, like, this is a tough situation. It's normal. Like, not everyone's able to pay their bills, but there's still options for you. And this is something that we can get through together. And so let's try and work together to get through it. And so just as a quick recap, here are the 5 ways to earn trust that we learned from these experts. It's been really helpful in our design process to have these reminders and kind of, look at our designs like through these lenses and see if we can make them stronger. I think especially in these crazy times with the pandemic, we know that a lot of our users are really hurting right now, that it's hard to, they're dealing with health issues, they're dealing with financial issues and losing their jobs. And so, it's something that is really top of mind for our team as we are building out new features. And so I wanted to leave you all with one last story just to kind of bring it all together and one more time illustrate the power of what these things can do. So a suspect in one of Chip's cases was on the run and avoiding an arrest warrant from the FBI. And so Chip's job was to try and convince this guy to turn himself in. And so again, he starts off, he uses empathy, and he really puts himself in the suspect's shoes and tries to imagine, what does it feel like to be constantly on the run, not just from the FBI, but from, you know, your former associates and rivals. And Chip realized that this man must be feeling really unsafe right now, really exhausted and afraid. So he keeps trying and trying, and after he manages to get this person on the phone, the first thing he says to him is, "My name is Chip, and I'm here to help. How badly does your life suck right now?" And so it worked. He was able to get the suspect's attention, and he was able to talk with him, you know, kind of about his problems and his fear, and eventually offer him a solution. So if the man would come and meet Chip face to face and shake his hand, then Chip would stay by his side for the rest of the day to personally guarantee his safety. The line goes dead. And then 20 minutes later, Chip's waiting on the subway platform, and a man shows up, sticks out his hand, and says, "My name is Jeff. Let's get this over with." And so, you know, by connecting with Jeff on this empathetic and emotional level, Chip was able to earn enough trust that Jeff would come to turn himself in. And, you know, they were able to figure out a solution to these problems together. So that was my talk for today. Thank you all for listening. You know, if you want to learn more about the work we do at Cedar and other research that we've done into these topics, you can find us on our site, our blog, and then we have a Medium blog too around the patient experience, where the design team and the data science team actually dive even deeper to some of these topics and get a little bit more technical. So yeah, thank you all for listening, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Diana. That was amazing. Really, really good. Yeah, Chip's life sounds interesting. Do they get UX training?
What?
Do they get UX training as FBI?
No. Yeah, I think that's what was so interesting, is that, you know, when we were first like, oh, we're going to talk to an FBI negotiator, we're like, this is going to be great. It's going to be so different than what we do. And of course, a lot of it is different. I don't, in my day-to-day work, talk to any, you know, max security drug cartel members. But a lot of these principles around really empathizing with people, putting yourself in their shoes, trying to help them problem solve creatively, it feels really aligned with UX. And so it was really nice to hear how it was applied in this totally different situation, but could also work for our work as well.
Okay. And just out of interest, what made you follow a negotiator? I mean, what made you choose that route? Because normally I don't know, do you research going to usability testing? What took you down that passage of going to?
Yeah, so we actually, we interviewed a series of experts in different industries, and I think this is one of the ones that was the most impactful to our work. But, you know, we talked to a behavioral scientist, we talked to a life coach, we talked to someone who is a VC in the financial industry to see what other tools, kind of financial tools he's seen in other countries. And I think part of the reason why the FBI negotiator was the most interesting one, though, is I think it really comes down to this issue of trust. Is like there's almost no other job where they need to solve that problem so directly and so quickly. And so, you know, they have these tactics that are clearly really powerful because they work in these really high stakes situations. And even though what we need to do is, so it kind of just felt like, well, if, you know, Chip can convince people to put guns down and turn themselves in, then even though we still have a big challenge in our work of convincing people to pay and all the behavioral change that comes with product design. It feels like a more achievable challenge knowing how these tactics work in their situation.
Absolutely. Fantastic. I just had one question though. So with the whole outbreak of the pandemic, did you guys at Cedar have to change any of your sort of UI or UX to be able to relate to people during pandemic now that's having, exorbitant bills?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this is something that we worked really closely with our clients for. So, our clients are healthcare providers and our product is white labeled. So all the messaging kind of comes directly from them to patients. And so we had a series of things that we offered. One is some direct messaging in the product, acknowledging the pandemic and linking out to resources that patients could get for help. The other was just around the billing cycle itself, actually, is around potential like pausing or extending the billing cycle so that patients wouldn't get sent to collections as quickly. And that one I think was great because of course getting messaging out there is important, but also actually being able to impact the consequences for patients and make sure that they didn't get punished while this was happening was something that we worked really closely with our providers on. And then the last thing that we did is I mentioned it a little bit, but we did have a follow-up research project where we made sure to talk with patients specifically around the pandemic and kind of learn how their experience had changed and how we might need to adjust our product moving forward for that. So we learned a lot of things, but kind of high level, there were like a couple main things. Is on the financial side, patients wanted more flexibility and wanted more time. And then from kind of the pre-visit experience, I talked about like building products that were a little bit earlier in the journey, not just around bills. They talked a lot about how processes have changed there with contactless check-in and everyone being a little bit more aware around their health. So it's actually great news in terms of adopting digital tools to make that easier. And I think some of the messaging around that, where before maybe we talked more about saving time and convenience, we changed it a little bit to talk a little bit more about like, helping to avoid contact and making it easier for you to do from your home.
Excellent. Did you get any pushback from your clients on that, or were they sort of susceptible to change?
I think a lot of them were really open to change and excited that we were reaching out proactively and able to move quickly on these things.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Diana. Really great talk. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you.